I was controlled by my mother and husband. Until a secret changed my life completely. I never thought I'd be able to write this. My name is Camilla, I'm 32 years old, and today I feel a mixture of relief and pain because I finally realized what it means to be myself, after years of living to please everyone. I grew up being molded by my mother, Lucia. She always knew how to use guilt, fear, and manipulation to keep me under control. And I naively accepted this as normal, because no one taught me that my own voice was worth anything. My father, Sergio, never helped. He remained silent, passive, letting my mother dictate everything, never defending me or offering me even a little support. The effect this had on me was devastating. I lived believing my role was to disappear, to annul myself, and to put everyone else's happiness and comfort above my own existence. When I met Andre, I thought it would be different. He seemed loving and present, but little by little he revealed himself to be, just like my mother, small criticisms, orders disguised as advice, subtle demands that made me doubt myself. At 32, I realized I was in an emotional prison that I allowed myself to build because I never learned to say no or demand respect. That day, everything exploded inside me. I was in the kitchen, Andre coldly commented on something I'd done, and my mother came in criticizing my way of organizing the house, which seemed so insignificant to any normal person, but to me was a direct attack on my ability to exist. In that moment, I felt a rage I'd never felt before. My heart raced, my hands trembled, and for a moment I thought I would fall apart. But something inside me ignited. I realized that if I didn't react now, I never would. I was tired of apologizing, of asking for forgiveness for existing, of living in fear of rejection and constant judgment. Desperation mixed with courage and absolute clarity invaded my mind. I needed to put an end to this cycle, even if it was painful, even if I felt alone. I looked at them, mother and husband, and for the first time I saw clearly what they were. People who wanted to mold me, control me, and who would never accept my freedom without resistance. It wasn't a lack of love, it was control. And in that instant, something shifted inside me. It wasn't a magical snap. It wasn't supernatural force. It was a decision, a raw and simple decision. I will no longer live to please anyone. I will no longer shrink myself to make them feel good. I felt fear, of course. Fear of everything that might come next. Fear of their anger, their shame, their loneliness. But I also felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt my own strength, a silent courage that had been dormant within me. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. It was strange, because I was in the middle of my own home, surrounded by the people who had hurt me the most, and yet I felt a freedom I never imagined possible. I remember every detail. The sound of the sink running, the light streaming through the window, Andre's heavy breathing, and Lucia's judgmental gaze. Everything seemed to heighten my sense of urgency. Every criticism, every controlling word they uttered, fueled my determination. I needed to speak up. I needed to speak out, and not softly or politely, but firmly, humanly, genuinely. No longer hidden, no longer diminished. So I began to speak. The words came out shakily at first, but with increasing firmness. I spoke of how I felt manipulated, controlled, and suffocated. I spoke of years of fear, guilt, and submission. I spoke of the pain of never having my opinion considered, of the frustration of denying myself so they could feel comfortable. Lucia looked shocked. Andre tried to intervene, but I continued. It was frightening and liberating at the same time. For the first time, I used my voice. For the first time, I didn't ask for permission to exist. For the first time, I heard myself speaking, and their silence, after those words, was almost comforting. I knew this conversation wouldn't be easy, but in that moment, I knew the change had begun. After that first outburst of words, I felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. Relief at finally having said everything I'd been holding back, and fear of what would come next. Andre remained silent, but I could tell he was angry. Lucia, my mother, seemed to be trying to find some argument to silence me, but nothing worked. For the first time, no amount of guilt she tried to impose had any effect. I finally understood. The guilt that had suffocated me for years wasn't mine, it was theirs. And oddly enough, this gave me the strength to carry on. Every word that came out of my mouth reinforced my decision. I needed to free myself. I needed to exist for myself, no longer for their whims. For years, I thought that pleasing everyone was synonymous with peace, but I discovered it only brought me fear, anxiety, and a weariness that consumed me from the inside out. Now, the anger I'd felt for years was transformed into energy for action. I could no longer remain silent. I took a deep breath and continued, this time with more determination. I spoke about every situation in which I felt humiliated, invisible, or disrespected. I remembered every birthday I spent without joy, every decision I made to avoid conflict, every night I cried alone in my room, feeling like I had no right to fully exist. I remembered how much I tried to change my voice, my mannerisms, my body, just so they would accept me. And for the first time, I looked at them without fear. I felt an incredible clarity. I am not responsible for their frustration, nor do I owe my life to anyone. I deserve to live for myself, with my desires, mistakes, and achievements. This realization gave me the courage to move forward. As I spoke, I felt my body react. My heart was still pounding, my hands sweaty, but each word seemed to lift a weight from my chest. I was exhausted, but alive. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to their control, but creating a space for myself, a space where my desires mattered, a space where I could breathe without fear. Looking at Andre, I realized he expected me to back down, to apologize, to put myself back down, but I didn't. I held my ground, firm, looking into his eyes, feeling each word echo within the house that once imprisoned me. Lucia began to speak, trying to manipulate me, telling me I was overreacting, that I was ungrateful, that everything she did was for my own good. But this time, I didn't give in. I didn't cry. I didn't stutter. I didn't cower. I took a deep breath and said I appreciated their efforts, but I could no longer live under control, that my emotions, choices, and life belonged to me, not them. The fear was still there, a nagging presence, but the clarity of my decision overcame any doubt. For the first time, I felt like I was taking ownership of my own life. At the end of that conversation, which lasted almost an hour, there was a heavy silence in the house. It was the silence of transformation. I was exhausted, my knees were shaking, my throat ached from talking so much, but something inside me opened. I finally understood that I no longer needed to live under the shadow of their manipulation. I had discovered my strength, my voice, and although there was still fear and uncertainty about what would come next, I felt for the first time that nothing could stop me. I was at the beginning of my freedom, and that day would be the turning point in my life. In the days following that confrontation, I felt my body react in ways I hadn't imagined. Every muscle felt lighter, as if finally letting go of years of pent-up tension. But at the same time, intense anxiety lingered. The fear of what Andre or my mother might do or say was still there, pulsing deep in my chest. But something inside me told me that even if they tried to break me, I wouldn't give in. For the first time, I realized that life didn't have to be lived under the shadow of fear and guilt. I could stand up for myself, say no, demand respect, and most importantly, believe my needs were valid. It was at that moment that I realized it wasn't about being brave all the time, but about acting even when I was afraid. I was tired of being weak to others, tired of existing to please them, tired of hiding. During that time, every look, every gesture from Andre and Lucia seemed to test my limits. I felt the tension in the air, and it was inevitable to remember all the times I'd given in, apologized undeservedly, and accepted injustice. But now, I responded differently. I learned to take a deep breath before reacting, to think about my priorities, and above all, to listen to my own voice. I discovered that emotional freedom doesn't come from confrontation alone, but from the constancy of staying true to yourself. Every decision I made, no matter how small, like choosing what to eat, when to rest, or simply not responding to an unfair complaint, was a silent victory. I was rebuilding my autonomy, brick by brick, and I felt like nothing could erase that. A defining moment was when I realized I no longer needed to justify my feelings. Before, any expression of sadness, frustration, or exhaustion was immediately accompanied by blame. You're being selfish. You're exaggerating. You don't understand the situation. But now, I could feel my emotions without needing anyone to validate them. I cried without shame, screamed mentally without fear, and even smiled lightly. Every sensation, no matter how simple, was proof that I truly existed, and that my life didn't need to be conditioned by other people's approval. I was learning to recognize myself as a complete person, entitled to desires, limits, and flaws. The change was also reflected in my outlook. For the first time, I didn't look away when faced with criticism or demands. I faced them, breathed, and decided whether or not it was something I accepted. I discovered that I could take a stand without causing harm, but also without shrinking. It's a delicate balance, and I confess that at times I failed, but simply realizing I no longer needed to live in silence was liberating. The feeling of power over my own life was addictive. Every choice I made it clear that I no longer needed constant approval to exist. The greatest lesson from these days is that freedom isn't instantaneous, but progressive. Each step I took to assert myself and respect my feelings brought me clarity about who I am. I was afraid of losing people, afraid of rejection, but the realization that I can't live to please anyone brought indescribable relief. It's a mixture of pain, anger, exhaustion, and, at the same time, strength, hope, and clarity. For the first time in years, I felt like I owned my own story, and this feeling is transformative. I knew it would be difficult, that there would be resistance and discomfort. But for the first time, I realized I'm not alone with myself, and that's enough to keep moving forward. Over time, I began to notice subtle yet profound changes within myself. With each small decision I made, I felt my autonomy grow. It wasn't something that happened overnight, but the consistency strengthened me. The feeling of fear that had previously paralyzed me still surfaced, of course, especially when Andre or my mother tried to pressure me. But now I could feel the fear, and, at the same time, act consciously, without automatically giving in. I discovered that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward despite it. With each act of affirmation, like deciding not to respond to an unfair complaint, setting limits on my tone of voice, or simply withdrawing from an argument, I felt an energy of freedom invading me. For the first time, I understood that my voice had power and that my feelings were valid. Daily life at home remained challenging. Lucia tried to make blaming comments, Andre sought out small provocations, but I wouldn't back down. I learned to breathe, observe my feelings, and respond only when necessary. I discovered I didn't need to justify my choices or explain my limits. This awareness gave me a strength I never imagined I possessed. I felt the energy of my own life returning, and with it, a sense of relief I had never experienced before. Each time I maintained my posture, even in the face of resistance, my self-confidence grew. It was as if each act of affirmation was a brick in the construction of my emotional freedom. One of the most impactful things was realizing that my emotions weren't a problem. Before, any sadness, irritation, or frustration was seen as weakness, and I'd shrink away to avoid causing discomfort. But now, I could feel, cry, complain, get angry, and still remain strong. This realization brought me an incredible clarity. Living to please never brought me happiness, only exhaustion. I began to allow myself to live according to my desires, however small, and each step in that direction was a victory. Emotional freedom was slowly emerging, and I finally felt like I was rebuilding my own space within the house and within myself. I realized that profound change requires time, patience, and above all, the courage to face resistance. I still felt pain, frustration, and even anger, but I learned to channel these emotions to strengthen my resolve to no longer submit. Each time I maintained my stance, I felt my self-esteem grow, and with it, my fear diminished. It was an intense learning process, learning to respect myself, to speak up for myself, and most importantly, to recognize that my feelings are valuable. I discovered that I can live with people who pressure me without letting them dominate me, and that setting boundaries doesn't make me aggressive, but human. The impact of this change on my life was enormous. I began to feel alive again, something I hadn't felt in years. I discovered an inner strength I hadn't known, a resilience that allowed me to continue, even in the face of fear and resistance. I felt I was finally in control of my life, not in an authoritarian or vengeful way, but in a conscious and firm way. For the first time, I realized that emotional freedom is more valuable than pleasing others at any cost. I could finally breathe, exist, and feel complete, even amidst conflict and challenges. And that day, that moment when I decided to speak out and no longer remain silent, would be the milestone of my true transformation. Today, looking back, I see how much everything has changed since that day I finally used my voice. My name is Camila, I'm 32 years old, and I still carry scars, but now they're marks of strength, not submission. The change wasn't easy, and it's not something that happens overnight, but for the first time, I feel like I'm living for myself. Every time I set boundaries, every time I speak up to Andre or my mother, I feel a freedom that previously seemed impossible. It doesn't mean the fear has completely disappeared, but I've learned to live with it, using it as a wake-up call, not a prison. The greatest achievement was discovering that my voice exists, that my feelings matter, and that I can be whole without having to erase any part of myself. I realize that real transformation begins when you decide you will no longer submit to anyone's control, no matter how much they pressure you, manipulate you, or try to make you feel guilty. When you put yourself at the center of your own life, you begin to understand that everything you've been through doesn't define who you are, but rather how much you've endured, learned, and evolved. I still have moments of insecurity. There are still days when fear hits harder, but now I know it doesn't control me. I feel a clarity I lacked before. I can exist, make mistakes, learn, and move forward without depending on anyone's approval. Today I know that being firm isn't being cold, it's being human. I no longer need to apologize for feeling angry, sad, or for putting myself first. I discovered that the life I deserve isn't the one dictated by others, but the one I choose to build each day. My relationship with Andre has changed because there's now a limit he can't cross, and my mother has finally realized she can no longer control my life. Emotional freedom isn't just about fighting or yelling, it's about deciding every day that your existence matters. The moment of rupture was painful but necessary. Talking, expressing my feelings, and setting boundaries showed me that I have the strength to deal with any resistance. For the first time, I felt that my choices matter, that my opinion matters, and that I don't need to live to please anyone. The feeling of fully existing is indescribable. It's a mixture of fear, relief, anger, hope, and happiness I'd never experienced before. It's a freedom that allows me to breathe, laugh, and even make mistakes, without guilt. Today, I can say clearly, it is possible to free yourself even when it seems impossible. It is possible to find courage within yourself, even after years of control, manipulation, and submission. I did it. And although the journey continues, I feel I will never again be annulled by anyone. My voice exists, my life is mine, and each day is an opportunity to live fully, unafraid to be myself. Therefore I say, don't be silent, don't shrink, and believe in the strength you carry within. It is possible to rise above. I am living proof of that.